Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, written by Mary Lovelace. Chapter 1. The Invitation. The view from the main view screen was striking. An opalescent planet turning slowly beneath Voyager's prow, its surface dusted in rolling cloud systems and a vivid sweep of golden archipelagos. In orbit, a formation of sleek silver satellites tracked their arrival, signalling welcome with precision pulses of light. On the bridge, Janeway stood with arms folded, watching as Paris tapped out the final approach sequence. Neelix stood beside her, his limited knowledge of these people offering valuable insight. "Status?" she asked. "Low orbit accomplished," Tuvok replied, "and we are being hailed." She nodded to Harry Kim to open the channel. The screen flickered, then resolved into the image of a tall, pale-skinned humanoid figure robed in what looked like cascading layers of soft metallic fabric. His voice, when he spoke, was deliberate and composed, yet friendly and welcoming. "Starship Voyager, welcome to Velarria. Our Grand Chamber extends formal hospitality to your captain and senior staff to join us at your convenience. Transport coordinates are being transmitted now." Harry nodded to Janeway, acknowledging their receipt. She verbally returned the greeting, welcoming the offer, and informing them they would be beaming down in due course. As the screen cut out, Harry raised his eyebrows. "Well, they seem friendly enough." Neelix nodded. "They have a reputation of being diplomatic perfectionists," he said. "Everything is carefully worded, carefully staged, but don't be too taken in by the friendly demeanour. They can be powerful negotiators. If you want to trade for supplies with them, Captain, then exemplary diplomacy will be required. They respect it the most, although it might also be prudent to bring your best poker face to the negotiating table. They're rich, powerful," he added, "and they know it. We do well to tread lightly and play by their plentiful rules." Janeway nodded, thanking him for the insights. "Negotiating with a planet full of bureaucrats and politicians," she mused humorously. "Sometimes I miss the simpler days of being an ensign." A small smile spread across Harry's face. "Do you really mean that, Captain?" She looked at him with a wry grin. "Not for a moment, Mr. Kim. But it's comforting to pretend I ever had it easy." Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State. Chapter 2. Arrival. The welcoming ceremony had begun in the Grand Hall, a spacious structure built from pale polished stone and towering arches. The walls were lined with ornate tapestries and illuminated by the soft golden light of lanterns. Several dozen dignitaries and other guests had gathered to welcome them, their formal attire a stark contrast to the simplicity of the Starfleet uniforms. A mix of traditional and modern elements marked the occasion. Janeway entered alongside Chakotay, Tuvok and Neelix, with Harry and B'Elanna close behind. The Starfleet party moved with practiced calm, cautiously surveying the layout without seeming to. Eyes followed them with quiet curiosity, the kind reserved for those who arrive from distant stars and carry unknown intentions. An officiant stepped forward to greet them. She was tall, her movement graceful. She had a translucent shawl draped from shoulder to wrist and markings of deep gold ink looping along her neck and temple. Her voice carried through the chamber with polished cadence. "I am Viral, liaison to the Grand Chamber. On behalf of the Council of Velarria, we extend formal welcome to representatives of the United Federation of Planets from the Alpha Quadrant." Janeway gave a slight bow of acknowledgement. "Captain Catherine Janeway of the Starship Voyager. We thank you for your gracious hospitality and look forward to furthering a productive dialogue for the mutual benefit of both our peoples." Viral's smile was composed. She looked pleased on hearing the captain's well-chosen words. "Well said, Captain. It is not often we receive travellers from beyond the outer zone. Your presence is most welcome and has already stirred great curiosity among our people." Viril's expression softened as she stepped slightly to the side, gesturing toward a wide, arched doorway. "Now that the greeting formalities are over, we'd be honoured if you joined us in the East Pavilion. It's a more relaxed space, an opportunity to speak candidly, enjoy some light refreshments, and perhaps get to know one another beyond the ceremonial formalities." She smiled, almost conspiratorially. "We've learned over time that a little informal rapport often makes future negotiations far more agreeable on both sides of the table." Janeway offered a polite smile. "It's a thoughtful gesture. Informal moments like this can often set a strong foundation for mutual understanding." Velarria nodded warmly. "We've found the same. While our people hold tradition and ceremony in high regard, we've learned that true rapport often begins away from formality." Janeway inclined her head, a balance worth appreciating. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State. Chapter 3, The Meet and Greet. The pavilion was smaller than the Grand Hall, but no less elegant. Sunlight spilled through tall archways, warming polished stone floors, and casting soft reflections from the delicate crystalwork set into the ceiling. Low tables were arranged with refreshments, light, fragrant offerings served in finely shaped glassware, and clusters of cushioned seating encouraged easy conversation rather than rigid protocol. Council members and senior Velarrian delegates moved through the space with deliberate ease, greeting their guests in small groups. Janeway found herself welcomed with warmth, polite but not distant, and was quietly relieved to find the tone far more relaxed than she had anticipated. For a time, there was only conversation, small talk, shared observations, a few exchanges of curiosity. Tuvok kept to Janeway's side, occasionally chiming in to clarify phrasing or cultural nuance when needed, but even he seemed to appreciate the lighter atmosphere. Eventually, one of the councillors named Maran, a tall man with striking ice-blue eyes and long grey braids, steered the discussion toward more reflective ground. He had a disarming way of speaking, casual but thoughtful, and Janeway found herself liking him immediately. "There are many things here on Velarria that an enlightened people such as yourselves may find of interest," Maran said, folding his hands lightly. "We are curators and collectors of art, of beauty, of meaning. I would be honoured to arrange for you to see some of our collections. I'm always curious to learn how other cultures interpret such things." Janeway raised an eyebrow, smiling slightly. "We'd be delighted. We're always open to sharing such experiences. We've generally learned that the sharing of our art, in particular, can go a long way in helping find common ground and ascertain greater bonds between our people." The man smiled warmly. "Then if your schedule permits, I will arrange a tour of our cultural holdings. Our primary exhibition hall is nearby. Tomorrow morning, perhaps." Janeway returned the nod with a polite smile. "That would be most welcome. I look forward to it." The informal reception continued for a short while longer, marked by cordial exchanges and the occasional shared laugh. The Velarrians remained composed, hospitable, clearly accustomed to entertaining guests from distant worlds. Eventually the gathering began to wind down. With farewells exchanged and protocol observed, the Voyager team soon made their way back to the transporter coordinates just beyond the formal pavilion, an open, paved, circular expanse bordered by low stone markers, clearly intended for dignified arrivals and departures. The visit had been brief by design, an initial step, a gesture of goodwill. Tomorrow would bring the first real glimpse beneath the surface. A shimmer of light marked their return to Voyager. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 4, The Atrium of Heritage. Morning arrived soft and golden. The away team materialised together in the same open plaza they had departed from the day before, its smooth stone tiles still cool beneath the rising sun. The surrounding gardens glistened faintly with dew, and the pale spires of nearby buildings caught the early light like burnished glass. Janeway stood at the head of the group, with Tuvok, Harry, B'Elanna at her side, and Neelix, who was already nodding to himself at the sight of ornate carvings lining the inner garden walls. Waiting to greet them was Viril, flanked by a small entourage, her expression as composed as ever, but with a hint of welcome in her eyes. "Welcome back," she said smoothly. "The Atrium of Heritage has prepared an exhibition for you. Select collections have been curated. Representations of culture, design, and philosophical legacy. A gesture of openness." Janeway inclined her head politely. "Good morning and thank you. We'd be honoured to view it. Opportunities to engage with our host's creative traditions are always valued among our people." Viril gestured toward a white-robed figure waiting nearby. "You'll be in excellent hands with our senior curator." With formal farewells exchanged, the group followed the guide into the gallery proper. They moved as a group, flanked discreetly by attendants in flowing, elegant robes, more ceremonial than supervisory. In the first hall, the environment was a sensory assault. Walls of colour and sound, kinetic sculptures humming in perpetual motion, holograms layered with shifting brushwork that responded to viewers' gestures. Everything was vivid, indulgent, overflowing with visual detail. "We believe beauty," said the guide, "is a language without boundaries, and that every great civilization should learn to speak it." At one stop, they were invited to taste traditional sweets shaped like glass orbs and served on platters sculpted from a mineral more brilliant than any standard crystal. At another, they were shown fabrics interlaced with microfilaments that created beautiful subtle animations, fluttering wings, shifting light, dancing ink across silk. The tour pressed on. Each room deeper into the complex hinted at more exclusivity, more guarded elegance. The attendants peeled away, one by one. The guide kept speaking, but more softly now, his words blending into the ambient quiet. He drifted ahead or lingered back, more caretaker than chaperone, allowing the group to wander at will and take whatever time they needed without prompting or pressure. The corridor narrowed slightly, curving into a quieter wing. The lighting softened, not out of reverence but style, cool-toned and indirect, casting long shadows across polished floors. It was quieter here, but not silent. Somewhere nearby, a subtle ambient melody played, pleasant, forgettable. "This is the gallery of singular works," the guide explained, pausing just long enough for the title to land. "Items of aesthetic or cultural interest, each one completely unique." The room was spacious and meticulously arranged, with generous gaps between each display. Platforms rose at different heights, giving the impression of effortless variety. Nothing was labelled in detail. A single line of text here, a symbol there. It felt curated more for private satisfaction than public understanding. Tuvok studied a sculptural piece suspended in mid-air, held together by magnetic nodes. Harry tilted his head toward a circular canvas that shimmered with texture, its colours changing as one moved. B'Elanna glanced sideways at a chunk of complex machinery resting beneath a transparent case. It looked unfinished, deliberately so. Neelix gave a short nod toward Catherine. "I don't think all of this is just about their history or culture," he murmured. "I think it's also a way for our hosts to show off how wealthy or sophisticated they are." Janeway walked slowly, hands clasped behind her back. "I'm inclined to agree, Neelix. This isn't just a hall of rare artifacts," she whispered. "It's also a statement, a subtle signal to their visitors, letting them know that whatever they negotiate for in trade, expect a high price." B'Elanna gave a small nod. "They want us to know they don't do cheap." Janeway didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth lifted just slightly. "Well, they can consider the message received." Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State. Chapter 5. Recognition. The next room was quieter. The lights were cooler, calmer. There were fewer items on display here, each spaced apart with plenty of room around them, like they didn't want anything to compete for attention. Harry had wandered a little ahead of the others, eyes scanning the displays. Something off to the side caught his attention, obscured behind a tall sculpture and a slim display case filled with ornate hand tools. At first glance, it looked like another statue. It was incredibly lifelike. A boy, small, slight, no older than early teens, stood on a low plinth. The features were strikingly delicate, almost too refined, as though someone had sculpted it with careful intent to capture an impression of fragility or vulnerability. But what fascinated Harry most were the ears. In addition to the usual humanoid ones, 2 large, soft animal ears were perched atop the boy's head, distinctly feline, cat ears, and just behind him, a long tail curved gently down one leg. Harry blinked, unsure if he was really seeing it right. A statue, so lifelike it could have been breathing, of a boy with cat ears. He stepped closer, drawn in by the incredible intricacy of the detailing, narrowing his eyes as he studied the delicate shape of the furry ears, trying to figure out how anyone could have sculpted something so delicately, so precisely. Then, the statue moved. It was quick. Shoulders flinched, ears flattened tight to the head, leaning away from Harry with a flash of fear. Harry, suddenly startled, immediately took a sharp step back. "Whoa! Sorry!" His voice dropped, hands halfway up. I thought you were—" He blinked, trying to make sense of it. "I thought you were a statue." The cat-eared boy didn't answer, didn't even blink, just stood there looking into Harry's eyes with an expression of fear. Harry's stomach twisted. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you," he said gently. I didn't realize." He looked closer now. The boy's chest was rising and falling, his eyes wide, his skin real, flushed, breathing. Not a display, a real person. Harry stared, trying to find his voice. The boy still hadn't moved, just stood there, rigid, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. But it was the eyes that hit hardest. Wide, glassy, watching him like a threat might come at any second. Not confusion, not even curiosity. Fear. Old fear. Learned fear. The kind that didn't panic. It just waited. Harry's voice dropped. "It's okay," he said quietly, not sure why he was whispering, only that it felt right. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." A soft shuffle behind him. B'Elanna had caught up. "Harry?" she asked, frowning as she stepped closer. "What's going on?" He didn't take his eyes off the boy. He's real, Harry said, voice low. He's not a display piece, he's alive. Velarria blinked. Wait, what? Janeway came up beside them, already watching. The boy remained still, standing straight, hands clasped together in front of him, eyes now looking down at the ground. But Harry kept looking. He couldn't shake what he'd seen. Then a voice cut in. My apologies. It's not usually reactive. A man in pale robes hurried quickly toward them. He wore the same silvery-toned formal robes as many of the other Velarrians, though his bearing was more practical, a steward, not a diplomat. I'm the appointed caretaker to this artifact, he added, giving a short bow. I apologize, I should have remained close by, but I was briefly called away. Harry turned to him, still rattled. I'm not sure I understand. How can he be an artifact? He's a real person. The handler offered a smooth, dismissive smile. It's known as a living artifact piece, bioengineered, precision-grown, a legacy prototype. There's not another like it in existence. He's a kid, Harry gasped, sounding exasperated. You've got him standing here like he's part of the decor. The handler's voice didn't change. His design is considered flawless. Look at the perfect balance in the facial features, the delicacy of expression. The chamber displays it for its rarity, but not for interaction. It's part of our heritage collection, something to be appreciated but not questioned. He looks scared, Harry said, softer now. The handler barely glanced at the boy, almost ignoring Harry's words. It's conditioned to remain still during viewings. It sometimes does respond to crowding, but it passes quickly. It's not permitted or trained to speak to guests. It knows its role. Seeing Harry's growing agitation, Janeway stepped closer to him, gently gripping his elbow. Ensign, she said, voice firm but calm. Stand down. Harry hesitated, jaw still tense, then backed off with a small nod. But he didn't stop staring. Janeway turned to the handler. He understands what we're saying? He nodded. It does. It's trained in comprehension, is obedient, maintained to a high standard. There is no need for concern. Its well-being is fully accounted for. The boy hadn't moved again. He stood there still, staring at the floor. Janeway gave a small nod. Thank you. We appreciate the explanation. The handler bowed and returned to his post beside the plinth, this time not stepping away. Janeway gave her officers a quick glance. Time to move on. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State. Chapter 6. Culture Shock. The group was led out of the gallery with quiet ceremony, their guide offering a few pleasant words about the next wing. Something to do with traditional craftsmanship and ceremonial objects. But no one really heard him. They followed in silence for a few paces down a wide corridor lined with glowing floor tiles and perfumed air, the kind of detail that usually drew at least a comment from Neelix. But now, even he said nothing. Janeway slowed her step just slightly, letting their guide drift a few feet ahead. That was difficult to watch, she said quietly, her tone controlled. He's not a display piece, Harry said, keeping his voice low but firm. He's a kid. I looked in his eyes. He was scared. Janeway glanced over. I saw it too. Did you hear how that handler talked about him? Velarria added, walking close. Like he was some kind of object, like property. Like it didn't even register that he was alive and clearly sentient. He may not be considered sentient by their standards, Tuvok said calmly. Or perhaps they do not believe sentience equates to autonomy. Well, they're wrong, Harry muttered. That boy knew exactly what was happening. He just wasn't allowed to show it or react to it. Janeway didn't respond right away. When she did, Her voice was quiet but firm. "I saw it too, Harry. And yes, it was disturbing. But the Prime Directive was written for moments exactly like this. We're not here to judge them or intervene in their society." Her tone remained calm, her voice almost a whisper. "This isn't our world. It's not our system. And we don't have the authority to impose our values, however much we might want to." Harry looked away, jaw clenched but silent. "That doesn't mean we turn a blind eye," Janeway added. "It means we take it in, we observe, and we carry on with the mission to secure the supplies we need." Tuvok gave a single, measured nod. "Continued observation may help us understand the broader context, but our neutrality must remain intact." Up ahead, their guide turned with a pleasant smile, gesturing them forward. Janeway took a slow breath, then looked to her officers. "Let's keep doing what we came here to do. Learn what we can." And with that, they stepped through the doorway to continue their tour. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 7, The Courtyard. Late afternoon on Velarria brought a shift in tone. The air grew cooler, the light more amber than gold. The Velarrians had arranged a cultural showcase in one of the outer courtyards, a series of performances, ceremonial demonstrations, and more curated exhibits meant to further impress their guests. Janeway and the others had been mingling politely, observing without pushing, learning what they could without stepping out of line. Conversations had turned more relaxed. The Velarrians were proud, and once they felt they were being admired, they became more open, though never unguarded. Harry stood near a tall stone colonnade, sipping from a shallow crystal cup filled with something sweet and strangely fizzy. He was watching a slow, fluid dance being performed with long ribbons when something caught the corner of his eye. At first he thought he was mistaken, but then he saw him again, the boy with the cat ears. Not standing on a plinth this time, just walking, if it could be called that, escorted along the edge of the courtyard by the same handler they'd met before. The boy's head was down. He wore the same opulent flowing fabric as before, but simpler now, with a wide collar that framed his delicate neck. His ears were flattened slightly, as if in a submissive posture, and his steps were small and hurried. Harry watched as they passed through a shaded walkway. The handler stopped him and began speaking to another official nearby for a moment. The boy stood waiting, silent, exactly where he was left. And then Harry saw it. The handler's hand closed around the boy's upper arm. Not harsh, not violent, but very firm. Controlling. The boy didn't resist, but he stiffened slightly, and his tail gave a sharp little twitch. It was nothing dramatic, just a look, a movement. But Harry felt it in his chest again, that same ache he'd felt in the gallery, the same quiet alarm. B'Elanna stepped up beside him, voice low. "You see that?" "Yeah," Harry said. They both watched as the boy and his handler disappeared down a side passage. A flash of pale fabric glinted as they turned the corner. "I really don't like it," she muttered. Harry didn't respond right away. He still hadn't looked away. "It feels like something's very wrong," he said, "and it feels like they've trained him not to show it." Over the next day and a half, the cat-eared boy was seen on 2 more occasions, each time briefly, each time under the controlling presence of his handler. Once in a garden courtyard, standing silently beside an ornamental pool while foreign dignitaries were escorted past. Another time at the edge of a dining hall, perfectly still as if placed there for atmosphere. He never spoke, never made eye contact, but his body language said more than words could. A slight flinch when someone passed too close, a downward tilt of the ears that Harry now recognised as nervousness or fear, and always that same look in his eyes, quiet, fearful, resigned, like someone playing a part they hadn't agreed to. The crew didn't need to speak about it openly to feel it. Something wasn't right. They were only being shown one side of things, and the more they saw, the more they couldn't ignore it. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 8, The Runaway. The negotiating room was quiet and softly lit, framed in pale marble and brass-toned accents that reflected the Velarrians' usual sense of elegance. Captain Janeway sat across from two senior delegates at a low, crescent-shaped table. Tuvok stood to her right, silent and watchful. Light refreshments had been served, formalities had been exchanged, and the negotiation for supplies had been progressing well. The meeting was already winding down when one of the delegates, Councillor Rennes, cleared his throat with smooth deliberation. "There is one minor matter," he said, adjusting the long, iridescent sash that hung over his shoulder. "Not urgent, of course, but worth mentioning while we have your attention, Captain." Janeway offered a polite nod. "Of course. How can I help you, Councillor?" "A living member of our cultural display has, well, wandered off," Rennes said, selecting his words with care. "A privately held artifact. Valuable. Irreplaceable. They are delicate and not accustomed to unsupervised conditions. We believe they may have, accidentally, slipped into one of the lower rural districts during a scheduled transfer." Janeway kept her expression neutral. "I see. Do you believe they're in danger?" "Only from the elements," the second delegate replied smoothly. "They are most fragile, not designed for endurance or rough terrain. Their role is ceremonial, aesthetic. They're not equipped to navigate unstructured environments." Rennes nodded once. "You may recall them. The humanoid displayed during the private gallery tour. A young male, pale complexion, feline ears. One of our more refined acquisitions." Tuvok raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "We understand your vessel has superior scanning capabilities," Rennes continued. "If Voyager were able to assist in locating them, it would be a gesture greatly appreciated and potentially rewarded by the Chamber. As you can appreciate, our reputation is pivotal in all that we do. Therefore, obviously, discretion is most valued in this matter." Janeway gave a measured pause. "We'd be happy to offer technical support, Councillor," she said. "Discreetly, of course. I imagine you'd prefer to avoid undue speculation, particularly when it involves such a prized cultural artifact." "That would be most welcome," Rennes said, inclining his head. There was a flicker of tension in his voice now. Subtle, but there. "They are considered a cultural treasure. The sooner they are retrieved, the less risk of misinterpretation." Janeway smiled, just faintly. "We'll begin sensor sweeps as soon as we've returned to the ship." The meeting concluded shortly after, with parting words exchanged in flawless diplomatic cadence. But as Janeway and Tuvok exited through the vaulted corridor, her posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Tuvok spoke first. "Councillor Rennes's body language and phrasing suggest there may be elements of the situation he chose not to disclose." Janeway gave a quiet nod, eyes forward. "That wouldn't surprise me. Their culture seems built on layers, what's shown and what's left unsaid." She paused, her voice thoughtful. But the boy didn't just accidentally wander off. He ran. And that tells us something no formal briefing ever could. And if he ran, Tuvok added, one could reasonably conclude he was being held against his will. Janeway nodded, her tone low. I think we've suspected that for some time. Let's find him, Tuvok. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 9. Found. As Janeway and Tuvok reached the transporter site, Harry was already waiting, having received her message requesting his assistance. I figured you'd want to be part of this, Janeway said as they approached. I know this matters to you. Harry gave a small nod. Yes, thank you, Captain. It does. They beamed up together. Now in the corridor outside the turbolift, their footsteps were quiet on the deck plating as the three of them made their way toward the bridge. He didn't just wander off, Harry said quietly. He ran. That much feels obvious. Janeway glanced at Tuvok, recognizing the same words they'd exchanged earlier, a conclusion she was quickly running out of reasons to doubt. She nodded, her voice low but steady. I agree, Harry, and if he ran, I want to know why. From him directly. No handler, no external influence, no cultural spin, just the truth. Harry glanced over. You think he'll talk? I think if he's finally out from under their control, he might, Janeway said. But we owe him the chance to be heard. They stepped through the doors and onto the bridge. Chakotay looked up from the command chair. Everything all right? Janeway moved to her seat. We've agreed to help the Velarrians locate someone who's gone missing. It's the boy we saw in the gallery, the one with the cat ears. Harry was already at his console. Scanning now. Just a few moments later, a bleep rang out from his console. Got him. Oh no. Weak life signs, very weak. He's in a forest, looks like rough terrain. Janeway turned sharply and began heading for the door. Beam him directly to sickbay, Harry, she said, her voice tighter now. And notify the doctor, tell him I'm on my way. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State. Chapter 10. A Dark Legacy. The doors to sickbay parted with a soft hiss as Janeway stepped inside. The young cat-eared boy lay unconscious on the primary biobed beneath soft, clinical lighting. His face was pale against the silver-blue glow. One side of his head was streaked with dried blood. The doctor stood over him, a cortical stimulator already in place, and a medical tricorder open in one hand, frowning at the readout. He's stable, he said without looking up. Unconscious, but I've stopped the cranial bleeding and I'm treating a mild concussion. Janeway stepped closer. The boy looked even smaller here than he had in the gallery, more like a child than a teenager. His large furry ears twitched faintly beneath his short, matted brown hair. His tail curled protectively along his side. The doctor adjusted the cortical stimulator gently. He appears to have fallen, judging by the abrasions, likely onto rocks. Right temple, fractured shoulder and left wrist. Nothing life-threatening but quite painful. Janeway kept her eyes on the boy, her voice low. How long until he wakes? Soon, the doctor replied, still scanning. Then he paused, his brow furrowed, and he adjusted the tricorder slightly, running the scanner slowly across the boy's torso. That's unusual. Janeway turned to him. What is it? The doctor's voice dropped. Old fractures, multiple. A pair of ribs, misaligned. Scar tissue along the scapulae. Internal bruising that healed without proper treatment. Captain, these weren't caused by the fall. Janeway's posture shifted, hands slowly curling at her sides. He's been injured before? She asked. The doctor nodded, his expression turning to a frown as if getting angry. More than once. Repeated trauma, and I would surmise over a long period. Janeway didn't speak right away. Her eyes were still on the boy. Small, still, fragile, too quiet. She swallowed once, then looked up at the doctor. They did this to him? Her voice was lower now, rough around the edges. Deliberately? The doctor met her eyes. I'm afraid it does appear that way, Captain. She blinked, jaw tightening. They said they'd trained him. She stepped closer to the bio-bed. Her voice dropped, but the anger in it was clear. But this wasn't training, was it, Doctor? The doctor stepped beside her, his tone matching hers now. No, Captain. This was torture. Systematic, repetitive, and ongoing. Janeway drew a slow breath through her nose, tension gathering in her shoulders. They hurt him until he learned not to move, not to speak, just to obey. There was a long silence. Her hand brushed the edge of the bio-bed, first gently, then tightening her grip. He stays here, Doctor. No handlers. No contact with the Velarians. Not until we understand exactly what's been done to him. She looked down at the boy again. Small, bruised. I'm not making promises, she said quietly. The Prime Directive still applies. But this, what they did. Her voice faltered for a moment. This wasn't discipline or conditioning. It was cruelty of the very worst kind. Abuse, neglect, or as you say, Doctor, torture. She let her hand hover near his face, then lightly brushed her fingers over his pale cheek, a gesture of obvious care. Let me know the moment he wakes. I hope he'll be able to talk to me, if he wants to. She paused, then added more softly, and whatever happens next, it starts with his voice, not theirs. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 11, Asylum. The lighting in sickbay had dimmed slightly to encourage rest. The diagnostic monitors above the bio-bed hummed with a soft, steady rhythm. The boy hadn't moved since his arrival, save for the occasional twitch of an ear or subtle shift in his breathing. Then, slowly, his fingers stirred. The doctor, who had remained nearby, looked up from his station and crossed over with a quiet efficiency. He adjusted the cortical monitor and scanned the boy again. There was a flicker of movement, barely there. His ears twitched again, folding slightly backward, then forward. A slow blink, then another. His eyes opened just a fraction, unfocused and clouded with confusion. Easy, the doctor said calmly, his tone gentler than usual. You're safe. You're on board a starship, Voyager. You've been injured, but you're going to be all right. The boy didn't respond. His eyes moved slightly, tracking the light overhead. His breathing increased, just a little. A hint of tension pulled at his shoulders, but he didn't try to sit up. He was listening. The doctor adjusted the monitor and lowered his voice. You are safe here. There is no danger. No one here will hurt you. You're in sickbay. I'm the ship's doctor, and you're under my care. Still no words. But the boy's gaze shifted toward the sound of the voice. Slow, wary. The doctor tapped his comm badge. Sickbay to Captain Janeway. He's waking up. The doors to sickbay parted again, and Captain Janeway stepped inside. She didn't speak at first. She paused just a few steps in, taking in the scene, the boy awake, the doctor standing nearby, and the stillness of the room. Her gaze softened slightly when she saw the boy looking back at her, cautious but alert. The doctor turned to her with a nod. He's responsive, no sign of disorientation, but he hasn't spoken. Janeway nodded once and approached slowly, stopping at a respectful distance from the bio-bed. "Hello," she said, her tone gentle but steady. "I'm Captain Janeway. You're on board the starship Voyager." The boy didn't move. His eyes were locked on her now, wide and quiet. His ears shifted again, just slightly, and his tail curled around one leg. His body didn't tense, but it didn't relax either. "You were injured," she continued. "We found you in the forest. You've been treated, and you're safe now." Still he said nothing, but he blinked, slowly. He was listening. "I know you're probably not used to speaking freely," she said. "That's all right. You don't have to say anything. Not unless you want to." Her voice dropped slightly. "But if you do, I'll listen." She waited for a moment longer, then gave him a faint nod. Not dismissal, just reassurance. "I'll be nearby," she said. "You're not alone anymore." And with that she stepped back, giving him space. His eyes scanned the room again, deliberate this time. The door, the doctor, no handler in sight, no familiar robes, no whispered instructions in his ear, no one telling him what to say. His throat moved as he swallowed. Then, very quietly, his voice emerged, rough, unsure but deliberate. "You're not from around here." It wasn't a question. Janeway turned back instantly. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened with focus, and something else softened with understanding. "No," she said gently, "we're not." The boy looked at her for a long moment, not with trust exactly, but with calculation, thought, like he was measuring his own theory against the reality in front of him. "I thought you might come," he said, almost to himself. "If I got far enough away, if they couldn't find me first." Janeway stepped a little closer, but slowly, careful not to crowd him. She seemed surprised. "You wanted us to find you?" He gave the smallest nod. "I didn't know if you would, but I thought, maybe." There was a long pause. He looked down at the blanket draped over him, then back up at her. "Are you going to send me back?" Janeway crouched slightly, just enough to meet his eyes levelly. "Do you want to go back?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted again, scanning the room, the doctor, the doors. There was a flicker of fear in his eyes, not panic, but something quieter, conditioned, a wariness so deep it moved before thought. Then he looked at her directly. "What would happen to me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, "if I were to answer no?" Janeway didn't flinch. Her expression held steady, calm, clear, unwavering. But inside, something in her chest tightened. "You'd be safe," she said softly. "No punishment, no consequences, just a choice, one that's yours to make." He stared at her, trying to read the silence between her words, searching for the catch, the trap, the shift in tone that would reveal the lie. But it never came. Janeway's voice stayed steady. "You're not in trouble. You're not being judged. You're not here to be punished." There was a pause. "You're here because you asked for help, and because we heard you." Janeway's voice lingered in the stillness of sick bay. The boy didn't speak. But something changed in his face, a tremble around his mouth. His shoulders shook, and his breathing grew uneven. He turned his face slightly to one side as if to hide it, but it was already too late. His eyes filled. A tear slid down the bridge of his nose, followed by another. He didn't sob, he didn't wail, but the tears came steady, silent, and unstoppable. Janeway didn't hesitate. She stepped closer, slowly, carefully, and placed a gentle hand on his arm, just enough to be felt. No command, no pressure, just contact, reassurance. "You're safe," she said softly. "Right here, right now. That's all you need to think about." He covered his face with one hand, turning slightly as his breathing faltered. His shoulders trembled beneath her touch. It wasn't fear anymore. This was something heavier giving way. Years of silence, control and dread, finally beginning to break apart under the weight of something he'd never fully dared to want. Hope. Not the distant kind, not the imagined kind, but real, spoken aloud, sitting beside him with a hand on his arm and a promise in her voice. He didn't move, but his body, so tense for so long, finally started to ease beneath her hand. Janeway lingered beside the bed, not rushing him. Then quietly he said, "My name is Kai." She met his eyes. "It's good to meet you, Kai." He hesitated, as if unsure whether he'd done something wrong, but she smiled, genuine, small. "Thank you for telling me." He gave a faint nod, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Janeway stayed beside him for a few more seconds, letting the silence settle, not heavy, but calm. Then, very quietly, his voice broke through the stillness. "Can I stay here?" She looked back down at him. "On this ship," he added, "with you. I really don't want to go back." His voice shook on the last words, not from uncertainty, but from how much it cost him to say them aloud. Janeway didn't hesitate. "Kai, nothing would make me happier than for you to stay with us here on Voyager." She gave his arm a final light squeeze, then stepped back. "I can't promise you that yet," she said gently. "But I will promise you that I'm going to do everything in my power to make it happen." Kai nodded. He'd seen enough diplomacy to understand the difficult position she was in. "I understand. And no matter what happens, thank you for trying." Janeway offered a faint, reassuring smile. "Get some rest. The doctor will take care of you for now. I need to speak with my crew. Start putting together what we'll need to help you, but I will be back soon." She gave the doctor a nod, then turned and quietly left sickbay. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State. Chapter 12. Strategy. The senior staff were already seated when Janeway stepped into the conference room. She didn't pace or soften the delivery. She spoke plainly. "His name is Kai, and he's asked if he could stay." A quiet stillness settled over the table. "He said he ran because he hoped we'd be the ones to find him. He watched us on the surface. He realized we might be different, that we might help." Harry leaned forward, arms crossed. I knew something wasn't right down there, the way they displayed him like some trophy, the fear in his eyes. Janeway nodded. The doctors confirmed what some of us suspected. Old injuries, untreated fractures, scarring, years old. The Velarians called it training. But in our culture there's another word for it. Torture. A ripple of reactions passed around the room. Disgust, disbelief, quiet anger. Tom shifted in his seat. So what do we do? We build a case to win Kai's freedom, Janeway said. Not a legal one. There's no courtroom here. This will come down to diplomacy, leverage, the right pressure at the right time. Tuvok gave a small nod. Then our goal is not confrontation, but persuasion. Exactly, Janeway replied. No matter how much we might want to, we cannot shame them. We need to give them a reason to let him go, in a way that will preserve their image and reputation. This has to be something they can justify, not something we force. Chakotay leaned forward. And if they don't budge? Then we keep pushing, she said, quietly, strategically, but we absolutely cannot put him back into the hands of his abusers. She took a moment to scan her eyes around the room, looking each person in the eye. I, as I suspect, like many of you, have already had thoughts about leaving orbit right now, and just putting as much distance between us and Velarria as possible, but we all know it's not as simple as that. The Prime Directive is still very much in effect, so we have to do this the right way. She looked to Tom. Work with the doctor. Document everything. Every fracture, every scar. If we're going to build a case, it starts there, with what he's survived. Tom nodded, serious. Understood. She turned to Tuvok. Work with Neelix. Start tracing his origin. Cultural records, diplomatic exchanges, anything that explains how he ended up in their hands. She paused. It won't decide the outcome, but it helps. The more we know, the stronger our position. Then a glance around the table, steady, unflinching. I know we're walking a line here. The Prime Directive still applies, but if we can prove he's not native and show the truth of what's been done to him, we may be bending the rule, not breaking it. She briefly glanced into everyone's eyes around the room. He asked for help, for asylum, and I gave my word I would do everything within my power to grant it. She finally sat. So now we do what we always do. There was a pause. We find a way. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State. Chapter 13. Diplomatic Chess. Janeway stood in her ready room, hands clasped loosely behind her back, when the comm chimed. Bridge to the captain. Incoming transmission from Velarria. Councillor Rhaenys is requesting to speak with you. She exhaled quietly. Put it through. The viewscreen image resolved into Councillor Rhaenys, seated in the same elegant chamber they'd met him in days before. He looked as composed as ever, draped in pale silken fabric that shimmered faintly with every movement. His expression was warm, even welcoming, but his eyes were sharp. Captain Janeway, he said smoothly. I trust all is well aboard Voyager. Councillor? Janeway replied evenly. Yes, indeed. Thank you for reaching out. We were simply following up on your kind offer of assistance, Rhaenys said. Have you had any success in locating our missing cultural asset? Janeway gave a polite nod. We have. He'd made his way into a forested region beyond the city perimeter. He was alone and somewhat disoriented. Unfortunately, he had suffered a fall and has received injuries as a result. Rest assured we have transported him aboard and he is receiving the very best treatment. I see, he replied. "That's most unfortunate regarding the fall," Renner said, smiling faintly, "but I'm very pleased you found them. Please convey my sincere gratitude to those involved." She nodded. "Of course. If you don't mind me asking, how damaged are they?" "He's stable now, and the injuries are not life-threatening, but the doctor is still evaluating the extent of the damage. He won't be fit for transport just yet." There was the smallest pause on Renus's end, a blink too long to be casual. "Of course," he said at last. "The artifact's physical composition is delicate by design. They weren't built for harsh environments. I do appreciate your medical technology is significantly more advanced than ours, but if you would permit one of our medical staff familiar with the artifact to come aboard, they may be able to offer relevant insights into their treatment." Janeway's expression remained unchanged, relaxed, but she knew exactly what he was trying to do. She gave a small, courteous smile. "I appreciate the offer, Counselor, but I think you'll understand. It would be premature to introduce external personnel into our medical environment while we're still assessing his condition. The doctor is extremely thorough, and his findings will help us determine the best course forward." Renus tilted his head slightly. "Of course. I only raised the point in the interest of ensuring continuity of care." "And that's commendable," Janeway replied smoothly. "But right now, his well-being is our top priority, and stability comes first. Once we have a clearer picture, I'll be happy to share a full update with you." She let the silence linger for a moment, enough to make her position clear without veering from diplomacy. Renus offered a composed nod. "Still, I'm sure your medical team is more than equipped to restore them to suitable condition." Janeway's tone didn't change, but there was an edge of steel beneath it. "We're doing everything we can, though the doctor's findings were more extensive than we expected." That drew a subtle reaction, an arched brow, a faint shift in posture. "Oh?" "Several older injuries came to light," Janeway said. "Fractures, scarring, signs of repeated trauma over a period of years, nothing related to the fall." A pause, just long enough for it to register. "Ah," Renus said, and this time his smile thinned. "Yes, I understand minor incidents did occur, particularly during early handling. I'm informed that aesthetic obedience training can be difficult to maintain, especially in the early phases." Janeway didn't blink. "I understand that cultural expectations vary, Counselor, but by our standards the damage was severe." Renus inclined his head slowly. "I would hope, Captain, that you're not suggesting our practices are inhumane. The artifact was gifted in accordance with all proper channels. They have lived comfortably and without complaint for years." "He hasn't voiced any complaint now either, but his actions speak clearly. He chose to run." Renus's eyes narrowed just slightly before his smile returned. "Well, youth often behave unpredictably, especially when exposed to unfamiliar freedoms. I'm certain it was an impulsive mistake. Curiosity, perhaps." Janeway didn't answer right away. She let the silence linger just long enough. "We're continuing medical observation," she said finally. "Once we're confident in his recovery, we'll determine the most appropriate course of action." Renus nodded once. "Of course. Though I do hope that recovery won't be unnecessarily prolonged. Extended absence may affect their conditioning, and there are members of the chamber quite eager to see them returned." "I'm sure," Janeway said, tone still even. "But I imagine those same members would prefer he not be returned with untreated injuries, or the risk of further trauma from being moved prematurely." The smile faded from Renus's face by a fraction of a degree. "Indeed." "I'll keep you updated," Janeway added. "Our chief medical officer is compiling a report. Once I've reviewed it, I'll be in a better position to discuss next steps." Renus inclined his head once more. "Very well. We appreciate your efforts in this matter, Captain. I trust this will all be resolved efficiently." "As do I," Janeway said. "Until then, Counselor." The transmission ended with a faint flicker. Janeway stood there for a moment, her posture unchanged, the glow of the screen still lighting her face. Then, slowly, she exhaled through her nose. She tapped her comm badge. "Janeway, to the doctor. I'll need your preliminary report on the boy's injuries. Everything you've got." Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 14, Not Alone. Sickbay was calm and quiet, the usual hum of medical equipment softened by low lighting. Kai sat upright now, a blanket draped around his shoulders. He perched on the biobed, legs folded tightly to his chest, holding himself in a position that felt safer than lying down. He looked cleaner, calmer, but his posture remained cautious, watchful. And behind those bright blue eyes, the fear still lingered. Janeway stepped through the doors, pausing a few feet from the bed. Kai looked over. He didn't smile, but he didn't flinch either. "Hello again," Janeway said gently. He gave a small nod. She walked over slowly and pulled a chair beside the biobed. When she sat, she didn't speak right away, just offered presence. "You said something before," she said quietly, "that you hoped we'd find you, that you thought we might be different." Kai looked down at his hands. "I wasn't sure." "What made you take the chance?" He hesitated. "One of them, a crew member. He looked at me differently." Janeway stayed still. "He didn't stare like I was a thing. He looked confused, upset." Kai's voice thinned. "No one who ever looked at me like that ever looked concerned before." Janeway tilted her head slightly. "Do you remember who it was?" He nodded. "I think he was one of your crew. Dark hair. He looked younger than the others. He spoke to my caretaker. Asked why I was standing there. I could tell he didn't like what he was seeing." Janeway gave a small smile. "That sounds like Harry. Harry Kim." Kai didn't react to the name, but his eyes stayed fixed on her, open now, waiting. "He's one of my bridge officers," she added. "Would you like to meet him?" There was a pause, then a soft reply. "Yes, please." Janeway tapped her comm badge. "Janeway to Ensign Kim. Report to sickbay." Harry's voice came through, light but alert. "On my way, Captain." Moments later, the sickbay doors hissed open. Janeway rose from her chair, giving Kai a reassuring glance before turning to face Harry as he entered sickbay. Harry slowed his approach instinctively as his eyes found the boy on the biobed. Janeway beckoned him over, her voice low but kind. "Harry, this is Kai." She looked back to the now more nervous-looking cat-eared boy. "Kai, this is Harry. He's the one you saw in the gallery." Kai's gaze lifted slowly, cautious but focused. Janeway continued, just loud enough for both to hear. "Harry, you were the reason he ran. The way you reacted to seeing him in the exhibition hall. It appears that moment mattered to him more than you know." Harry blinked, caught off guard, but nodded, quietly moved. Janeway offered Kai a soft smile. "He wanted to meet you. Maybe just talk, or just keep each other company for a while. There's no pressure, no rush." Then she gently touched Harry's arm and leaned in with a murmur. "He needs kindness right now, Just be yourself, Harry, that's all. She took a last look at Kai, smiled, and assured him she would be back later. With that, she stepped back and left, the doors sliding closed behind her. Harry turned, his voice softer than usual. He gave a soft smile. "Hey, I'm really glad you're okay." Kai gave the smallest nod in return, the faintest smile touching his lips, but was unsure how to respond. "I guess you really read my emotions down there in the exhibition chamber," Harry said, as he took the nearby seat Janeway had used, sitting lightly. "That was perceptive of you. I really didn't like what they were doing to you." Kai looked at him, unsure how to respond, then carefully, "I sensed that." "Would you like me to stay for a while?" he asked. Kai glanced toward the door, then back at Harry. "You're not here to ask questions?" Harry shook his head. "No, not unless you want me to." That earned the smallest flicker of something in Kai's face. Not a smile, but close. "You want to stay with me?" Kai asked, sounding surprised. Harry saw the perplexed look in his eyes. Not suspicion, just disbelief, like no one had ever stayed simply because they wanted to. Harry softened his voice. "Yeah, if that's okay with you." Kai looked down for a second, his arms still wrapped loosely around his knees. He nodded, just once. "I think I'd like that." They sat quietly for a few moments, just breathing the same air. Kai blinked, silent again, but something in him eased, just a little. His eyes drifted to the ceiling, then to the nearby console lights. "Your ship is quiet," he murmured. "Not like the places I'm used to." Harry smiled softly. "Yeah, she hums more than she talks. I always liked that about Voyager. You can hear her if you listen, but she doesn't interrupt." Kai's head tilted slightly, as though filing that away. His posture shifted, just a little. There was something in his eyes, like he wanted to say more but hadn't figured out how. Harry noticed the flicker of tension. "You okay?" he asked gently. "You don't have to talk, but if there's something on your mind, I'm happy to listen." Kai hunched up slightly, his big fluffy cat ears flattening against his head as if something oppressive was suddenly weighing on his mind. "I'm not really allowed to talk, especially not about my life." Harry kept his voice soft. "Not allowed? By who?" Kai's fingers tightened slightly around the blanket. "My caretaker. The house rules. Talking was discouraged, strongly." He paused. "It makes people uncomfortable, so it's forbidden, that's what they always say." Harry shook his head gently. "That's not how it works here on Voyager. You're not under those rules here." Kai looked unsure. "But someone will hear. They'll find out what I said." His voice started to shake. Harry leaned in, steady but kind. "Kai, no one's watching you here. No reports, no surveillance, no handler, and absolutely no punishment. You're on Voyager now, and we don't punish people for speaking the truth. Not ever." Kai's gaze dropped again, still curled inward. "But if I say something wrong, you might not want me here." Harry's chest ached at that. "That's not going to happen. I'm not here to test you or judge you. I'm here to sit with you, to be a friend. To listen, that's all. I promise." Kai didn't answer right away. His ears twitched once, then settled again. Harry gave him space. "It's okay to talk if you want to. You don't have to explain anything unless you feel ready. But if you do, I promise nothing you say will leave this room. Not unless you want it to." He paused, then added gently, You've got more power than you think, Kai, and certainly more rights than you realize, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. Kai didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on Harry's face, searching for any trace of insincerity. But there was none. Just calm, patient presence. Kai stayed quiet for a long moment while he could feel something in him shift. Tentative, uncertain, but real. Then, slowly, he drew in a breath. Not a fearful one, but the kind someone takes before stepping into unknown ground. The kind that says, maybe it's safe now. Maybe it's time. He felt the need to look down at his own small hands, turning them slowly, as though trying to make sense of their perfect shape, their use, their history. Then, as if some long-locked vault had been unsealed, the words, fragile, forbidden words, began to emerge. "They always said I was too reactive," he whispered. "That I felt too much. That my senses were too sharp. That I startled too easily, flinched too much. It made me harder to manage, harder to train, harder to keep." As he heard it, Harry's throat tightened. The words hit him like a truth he hadn't been ready for, simple, painful, and far too real. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. He looked down, then back at Kai, his eyes softening, his chest aching. "That's—" he tried, but the word faded. He swallowed hard, willing himself steady. "You should never have been made to feel that way," he said finally, barely above a whisper. "Not for something that's just part of who you are." A pause followed as he wrestled with the quiet sadness and the slow rising anger clawing at his chest. "There's nothing wrong with you, Kai," he managed. "You were just in the wrong place, with the wrong people." He paused, voice gentler still. "Feeling deeply, it's not a weakness. It's something to be protected, encouraged. It means there's so much more to you than they ever let you be." Kai didn't look up, but was clearly listening to Harry's words. Harry leaned forward, voice steady now. "You're not something to be kept, Kai. You're not a trinket or a display item. You're a person. A wonderful sentient being, unique in all your own ways, and in my world, that's the most protected and precious thing we have, the right to think, to choose, to live free." Kai's eyes locked on Harry's face. He was clearly both surprised and moved by his words. "I always wondered if that might be true, that I could be more than just an artifact. But no one ever said it to me before." Harry didn't reply right away. The words caught him, simple, honest, and far too heavy for someone so young. He felt it land deep, like a weight behind his ribs. That someone had lived their whole life, unsure whether they were more than just an object. It hurt in a way he couldn't begin to describe. He swallowed against the lump rising in his throat, trying to hold himself steady. There was a pause. Kai's voice thinned. "When I saw you, in the chamber, the way you looked at me, you were angry." Harry nodded once. "Yeah, I was." "I've never seen anyone do that before," Kai said quietly. "No one's ever looked angry for me before." He went quiet for a moment, then spoke again, lower this time. "I'd been waiting for someone like that. Someone who might see what I was. Someone who might care." Harry didn't move. Kai's voice cracked just a little. "That's why I ran." He looked down again, swallowing hard. "I'd thought about running for a long time, but I've been waiting for the right person. Watching, hoping I would find someone who might take me away from here. And when I saw you..." He paused, blinking rapidly. I knew. You might be the one. There was a long silence. Then Kai added, barely above a whisper, Thank you. A single tear slipped down his cheek. The words landed like a punch in Harry's chest. He blinked hard, jaw tightening, trying to push past the sting in his throat. It wasn't the gratitude that broke him. It was the innocence behind it. The quiet, raw hope in a boy who had spent his whole life waiting for a stranger to care. Harry swallowed, leaned forward just a little and said, You don't owe me thanks, Kai, but I'll never forget that you trusted me enough to run. His voice wavered, but he didn't look away. And I promise, no more waiting in silence. You've been found, Kai, and you matter. Kai wiped his cheek with the edge of the blanket, the movement small and uncertain. He didn't speak, but when he looked back at Harry, there was something different in his expression. Lighter, less guarded. Harry gave him a soft, wordless nod, accompanied by a faint smile of reassurance, the kind that said, I'm not going anywhere. Kai leaned back slowly against the pillow, the blanket still wrapped around him. His posture had eased. The tension that had gripped his frame since the moment he arrived was beginning to loosen, thread by thread. He didn't need to speak. He'd said enough for now. Harry stayed in the chair beside him, quiet, present, steady. Not to fix anything, just to be there. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State. Chapter 15, Building a Case. The bridge was quiet under the evening lighting. Most of the crew had rotated off shift. Chakotay stood near the forward console, arms folded, watching the planet on the main view screen. Tuvok was nearby, calm as ever. Is it true that they spoke about him like he was nothing? Chakotay asked Tuvok quietly. An ornament, an object to be possessed and shown off, with no hesitation, no shame? Tuvok didn't look up from his console, but nodded his head affirmatively. Such attitudes, while regrettable, are not uncommon in isolationist societies with hierarchical aesthetics. Beauty becomes a commodity. Individuals become objects. Chakotay exhaled through his nose. You'd think I'd stop being surprised by this sort of thing. But every time, he shook his head, eyes still on the planet. Tuvok finally glanced over. The capacity to be disturbed by cruelty is not a weakness, Commander. It is a function of empathy and a strength in leadership. Chakotay gave a faint smile. I'll take that as agreement. Tuvok nodded. Indeed it is. He paused for a moment, thinking carefully about his next words. Among the many senior officers I have served with, I have observed that your capacity for emotional insight does remain consistently notable. Chakotay looked over, a little taken aback. Was that a compliment, Tuvok? A quiet grin forming. Tuvok returned his focus to the console. Merely an observation, Commander. Chakotay's smile lingered. Either way, I appreciate it. They exchanged a brief, respectful nod, nothing more, and nothing less than what the quiet moment required. The planet rotated slowly, steady and silent. The lights in sickbay had dimmed, now deep into evening mode. All but one of the biobeds were empty. Kai slept quietly under a light blanket, his vitals steady, displayed on the nearby monitor. Tom Paris stood at the central console, arms folded, staring at the slowly rotating anatomical scan hovering above the display. The doctor moved around the screen, adjusting the filters. Here, the doctor said, tapping a section near the ribcage. Old fracture, poorly set, healed without any medical correction, likely from blunt trauma. Tom squinted at the highlighted area, then shifted his eyes to a secondary readout. "That's not recent?" "No," the doctor replied. "Judging by the calcification rate, I'd place it at 8 or 9 years ago, maybe earlier." Tom didn't say anything for a long moment. The doctor tapped again, shifting the scan to the shoulder blade. "Another one, same pattern, and if you look here, left wrist, femur, and 2 metacarpals. Healed under duress, not clinical supervision." Tom slowly exhaled. "You're saying they just let him heal like that?" "I'm saying," the doctor said tightly, "that no attempt was made to treat these properly, which suggests 2 possibilities. Either no access to proper care, or, I suspect more likely, deliberate neglect." He brought up a second file. Internal scarring, minor nerve damage, suppressed pain response markers. Tom shook his head. He was trained not to react, wasn't he? The doctor didn't answer right away. Then, with a quiet nod, "Yes, I believe so." Tom swallowed. "How old do you think he was when the first injury happened?" The doctor studied the scan a moment longer. 5, maybe younger. Tom didn't say more. He didn't need to. The doctor didn't speak again right away, and Tom didn't ask anything more. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the biobed across the room, on the sleeping, cat-eared boy curled beneath a thermal blanket, one arm curled around himself like a shield, his face calm now, but too pale, too still. 5 years old. The number stayed with him, lodged somewhere deep, sharp and immovable. He folded his arms slowly, the movement more for grounding than anything else. "This isn't just a medical file anymore, is it, Doc?" he said quietly. "This is a record of what they did to him, of what they let happen." The doctor gave a small nod and his voice was softer now. "Then let's make sure the record's clear." Tom nodded, looking more determined than ever. "I'll start compiling everything," he said quietly. "Time-stamped, documented, cross-referenced." The doctor nodded. "And I'll include a medical statement, objective data first, but I won't shy from the implications." Neither of them spoke after that. They just worked, slowly, carefully, putting together the kind of report that would one day be handed across a diplomatic table, the kind of report no one could ignore. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State. Chapter 16, Calm Before the Storm. The ship had gone still. Corridors were quiet now, dimmed for the night cycle. The hum of systems filled the silence, soft and constant. Voyager breathing in her sleep. In the mess hall, Neelix wiped down a counter that didn't need it, his motions slow. He paused for a moment, staring at nothing, his expression unusually serious. Then he quietly set a covered bowl aside on the warming tray, just in case someone got hungry later. In engineering, B'Elanna sat alone at a console, reviewing power allocation charts for the 10th time. But her eyes kept drifting to the edge of the screen, unfocused. Finally, she sighed, shut it down, and rested her hands on her knees for a long moment before standing. In his quarters, Chakotay sat in half-shadow, staring out at the stars. He held a mug he hadn't touched. His thoughts weren't on duty logs or navigation reports. Not tonight. One deck below, Tom Paris leaned back in a chair in sickbay's auxiliary office, a pad resting on his chest, unfinished. He wasn't asleep, just still, just thinking. And in the dim quiet of sickbay, the doctor stood beside the primary biobed, checking with care on the cat-eared boy, who now slept without flinching. Kai's breathing was steady, one hand curled near his face, the other resting lightly against his chest. He looked younger than ever in sleep, small, fragile, but finally at peace. The doctor adjusted the monitor's brightness, more habit than need. He glanced around the room once, then leaned in slightly. "You're safe now," he said softly, "and I promise we'll all do whatever it takes to keep it that way." He stood there a moment longer, then returned to his desk, his eyes lingering on the boy just once more before the lights dimmed again behind him. The past day had been quiet on the surface, but beneath it, diplomatic tension had begun to ripple. The Velarians had sent 2 further transmissions, each one more carefully worded than the last. They hadn't demanded Kai's return outright, but the pressure was there, polite inquiries, veiled reminders, a growing edge to the civility. It was early. The ship was quiet in that brief hush between night cycle and the day's first shift. Janeway stood at the viewport in her ready room, arms folded, watching the stars. A pad rested on the desk behind her, still glowing, still open. The medical report. She didn't need to read it again. The chime sounded. "Come in." Tuvok entered, composed as ever. He carried a smaller pad in hand. "The Velarians have responded. Councillor Renus is requesting a follow-up discussion regarding the artifact." Janeway turned slightly, one eyebrow raised. "The artifact? They're still refusing to use his name or even refer to him as a person." Tuvok inclined his head. "Indeed." She stepped toward her desk, tapping the screen once to darken it. "What's the tone?" "Polite, measured. Slightly more formal than previous correspondence, but not yet hostile." Janeway gave a quiet nod. "They're tightening their language. That means they're starting to feel pressure." She moved to the replicator, ordered a black coffee, and took a slow sip before continuing. "I'll meet with them this afternoon," she said. "In the meantime, I want the senior staff briefed again. We stay aligned. No surprises." Tuvok handed her the new pad. "Preliminary data on the boy's origins. Mr. Neelix uncovered records suggesting Kai was transferred between ruling families during a ceremonial exchange over a decade ago. However, the documentation is unusually vague, especially by Velarrian standards." "Deliberately vague, Tuvok?" Janeway asked. "Uncertain," he replied simply. She studied the pad for a moment longer. "I wonder what else they've chosen not to record," she murmured. Then she set it down beside the medical report. "We move carefully," she said, "but when the time comes, I'll make it clear. There's a line between cultural tradition and institutional cruelty, and they've crossed it." Tuvok gave a short nod. "Understood." Janeway's voice was quieter now, but firm. "They're going to try and control this narrative." "What they don't know," she said, reaching slowly for the second pad, "is that we already have the ending." Sickbay was still dim, lit by soft overhead lights and the muted glow of medical monitors. The ship was just waking up. So was he. Kai sat upright on the biobed, legs drawn up close, a light blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His ears twitched slightly as he turned his head. Those soft, oversized feline ears that made him look impossibly young, impossibly out of place among the sterile edges of Starfleet equipment. Janeway entered without ceremony. She didn't speak right away. She just watched him for a moment, taking in the way he sat so still, like he hadn't yet decided whether he was allowed to relax. "Good morning," she said gently. Kai gave a faint nod. "It's hard to sleep here. Everything's so quiet, like it's listening." Janeway smiled softly. "It is. Voyager's good at that. She knows how to hold her breath when someone needs it." He looked down at his hands. "The doctor said you were meeting with them today?" "I am," she said, stepping closer. "We're going to talk about your situation, about what comes next." Kai's ears shifted, flattening against his head in uncertainty. Will they take me back? Janeway's voice stayed calm. They'll try, but I'm not going to let them decide your future without your voice being part of it. He looked up at her then, not pleading, just watching, searching her face for anything he could trust. She felt it again, that quiet pull. Yes, he was fragile, but it was more than that. He had been made to be beautiful in a way that stirred instinct. The soft features, the wide eyes, those expressive ears. It wasn't vanity, it was something else. Something that made you want to protect him, not because he asked for it, but because no one ever had. Janeway drew a breath and came to sit lightly on the stool beside his bed. You're not a possession, she said, and you're not a bargaining chip. You're a person. That's what I'm going to remind them of. Kai blinked slowly, his tail curling closer around his side. Do you really think they'll listen? Janeway looked at him evenly. I think they'll hear me. Whether they listen depends on what kind of people they really are. He nodded faintly. Janeway stood again, smoothing her uniform as she did. Stay here. Rest. The doctor will be with you, and I'll be back as soon as I can. She turned to go but hesitated at the door. Then softer. You deserve better than what they gave you, Kai. Whatever happens, don't ever believe otherwise. He didn't answer, but as the doors whispered shut behind her, his arms tightened slightly around his knees, and for the first time the words she'd left him with didn't feel impossible. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 17, Confronting the Truth. The Velarrian council chamber was just as Janeway remembered. Vaulted ceilings, cascading silk panels and golden fretwork that caught the filtered daylight. Soft light spilled through high crystal windows, making the air shimmer faintly, as if the entire room had been burnished to a glow. It was quiet, intimate. A handful of delegates stood behind a curved reception dais, Councillor Renus among them, his robes immaculate, his smile a little too polished. Two others flanked him, one older, one younger, both styled to perfection, their expressions unreadable behind layers of protocol. Janeway entered with Tuvok at her side. She didn't bow, but inclined her head in a gesture of respect. Tuvok mirrored it, minimal, precise. Captain Janeway, Renus said, his voice smooth as ever, we are honoured by your presence. Councillor, Janeway replied evenly, thank you for seeing us. Renus gestured toward the semicircular table laid with crystal vessels of scented water and neatly arranged dried fruits, untouched. Please, he said, let us speak plainly. The situation regarding the missing artifact has caused some concern within our cultural offices. He folded his hands with practiced calm. We are, of course, grateful that your crew located them so swiftly. We trust they are in good health? He's still recovering, Janeway said, but he's safely aboard Voyager and receiving care. Renus nodded once. Excellent. Then I assume we may now discuss the details of his return to our stewardship? Janeway didn't blink. That's exactly what I came to speak with you about. A faint pause followed. One of the older delegates shifted slightly, the first real movement behind the stillness. Raynar smiled again, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Well then, he said smoothly, let's begin. They sat. The chairs were high-backed, carved from pale wood and inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Everything gleamed. Janeway folded her hands on the polished table in front of her. Tuvok stood just behind her right shoulder, silent and watchful. We understand the value of cultural preservation, Janeway said evenly, and we're not here to challenge the dignity of your traditions. Renus inclined his head. Your respect is noted, Captain. Janeway continued, her tone composed. But I trust you'll understand. When a sentient being asks for asylum aboard a Federation starship, we are obligated to listen. There was a pause, subtle, measured. The older delegate to Rhaenys's left spoke at last, his voice cooler, more deliberate. You refer to the artifact as a sentient being. I do, Janeway said. Rhaenys's smile remained unchanged. Captain, we appreciate your position. However, I believe there may be a misunderstanding. The item in question is not a citizen. It was received through formal diplomatic exchange many years ago. A gift, carefully preserved, maintained, and displayed in accordance with our highest cultural standards. And trained? Janeway asked, holding his gaze. He didn't flinch. No flicker of shame. Rhaenys offered a slight nod. Prepared, conditioned, groomed to meet the expectations of his station. You speak of him like a museum piece. The younger counsellor looked genuinely puzzled. He leaned forward, hands lightly clasped. The artifact is a museum piece, he said. Captain, I mean, no offence. But this appears to be a simple cultural misalignment. It's not uncommon. When peoples of different backgrounds meet, especially across a diplomatic table, there are always moments like this, moments where assumptions don't quite line up. That's why we place such faith in diplomacy. He smiled faintly, pride rising in his voice. Our systems of governance have a long history of bridging impossible gaps. We've united species who once viewed each other as enemies. We've found common ground where others saw only conflict. It's what we're known for. He said it plainly, with the steady assurance of someone who had said it before. But the pride didn't linger long. Rhaenys returned to the matter at hand, his tone as smooth as ever. Of course, reputations aside, the well-being of cultural holdings must be taken seriously. We've reviewed the preliminary report your medical team submitted. I must say, we were deeply troubled by the alleged mistreatment it describes. He folded his hands, expression composed. I can assure you such behaviour is not reflective of our cultural values. It is neither condoned by the Chamber nor tolerated by our preservation stewards. The caretaker assigned to the artefact will be subject to immediate disciplinary review and replaced with someone more appropriate. He looked to Janeway, clearly expecting approval for the swift response. Janeway didn't blink. I see. She reached for the pad she'd brought, placing it gently on the table and sliding it forward. Counsellor, I'd like you to take a look at this. Rhaenys accepted it with graceful fingers, as though she'd handed him a ceremonial scroll. He scanned the screen. His smile didn't falter, but it didn't deepen either. The second delegate leaned in slightly. The third remained motionless. After a pause, Rhaenys looked up. These are internal records. Yes, Janeway said quietly. Your own. She let the words settle. Hospital entries, treatment logs, notes from your own physicians, multiple incidents, multiple injuries, blunt trauma, fractures, scar tissue, bruising patterns consistent with prolonged restraint. And not just medical data, observational commentary. She didn't look away from his face. One doctor wrote that the boy was difficult to condition due to emotional resistance. Another noted a fractured clavicle occurred during what they described as a correctional response. She paused, sitting back in her chair. Her expression had hardened. That's not training, counsellor. That's brutal, systematic abuse. And the most disturbing part is that it appears to have been sanctioned by the state. The table was silent. Rhaenys's gaze hadn't shifted, but something behind his eyes had. A flicker, not of guilt, but of calculation, of consequence. The older delegate to his right leaned in slightly, voice low but firm. Janeway couldn't hear the words, but the warning was clear. Rhaenys, he said, just loud enough for the table. Too much exposure and we lose face. The reputational fallout could be irreversible. The third delegate gave a single, slow nod. Agreement, not concern. Renus drew a breath through his nose, smoothing his expression into neutrality. "Captain Janeway," he said, voice carefully even, "we acknowledge the gravity of what you've shown us, and we recognize that to dismiss it outright would create diplomatic strain." His tone never wavered, but his fingers tapped once against the table before folding neatly again. "It is not our intent to appear indifferent to suffering, but nor can we treat this as a routine personnel issue. The individual in question, regardless of how your people may define him, represents a unique and irreplaceable asset to our cultural legacy." He glanced at the pad, then back to her. "This isn't merely a matter of value. It's a matter of historical continuity, of national identity." Janeway held his gaze, steady and composed. "I appreciate that your entire system is built on reputation, and I understand what this could mean for your public image if these facts were to slip out without context," she said. "But that's not my goal, councillors. What I'm offering is a solution, a way out, a path forward that lets us resolve this, quietly, with dignity, and your reputations intact." Renus looked at her. She could see behind the fading smile that he knew she had the upper hand, not to mention the moral high ground. "Councillor, please understand I'm not here to shame or ignite scandal. That helps no one. Not him, not you, not us," she said, her voice low but firm. "But I think you understand now that returning him to your care might be noticed and judged. One of your colleagues said something to me during our first meeting," she added, her voice quiet. "Everything has its price." She held his gaze now fully. "So, councillor, what's his?" Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 18, Heat of Negotiation. Renars had gone still again, the pad still resting where he'd set it down. He no longer touched it. The other two delegates exchanged a brief glance. Barely a shift in posture, but enough for Janeway to see the recalibration behind their eyes. "We do not dispute that this matter is layered," Renus said at last, his tone cautious. "But we must return to the core of the issue. This is not a legal disagreement, Captain. It's cultural. The artifact in question was never intended to possess autonomy. That was never its role." Janeway didn't flinch. "Autonomy doesn't rely on intention," she said calmly. "It relies on reality, and by every meaningful standard, the individual you refer to as an artifact is a sentient being, self-aware, capable of thought, feeling and choice. Whether or not that was your design doesn't change what he is." She leaned in slightly, her voice steady. "Autonomy isn't something you program. It's something that emerges. And once it does, it can't be ignored." She pressed on. "You may not have intended for him to be more than a decorative piece, but he thinks, he feels, he made a conscious choice to run away and ask us for sanctuary, for protection from those he believes are holding him captive, and unquestionably against his will. That in itself speaks volumes." She paused, letting the weight of it land. "You call him an artifact, but everything about his actions says otherwise." Her voice softened just enough to signal finality. "And now that we've seen that, we can't unsee it." The older delegate shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing slightly. "With respect, Captain, you speak as if his condition were natural, but he was created, engineered for compliance, for aesthetic harmony, for a specific social function. He wasn't born, he was constructed." Janeway didn't blink. "He bleeds, he suffers, he thinks, and now he's asked for freedom, for protection from those who once claimed ownership over him. Let's be honest, that's the only parameter that matters. Silence held for a moment. Tuvok spoke next, his voice calm and measured. There are members of the Federation whose species do not reproduce biologically. It has no bearing on their sentience, nor on their rights. A flicker passed across Rennis's face, a slight tightening at the corners of his mouth. The second delegate leaned forward, his tone shifting, sharper now, with the first real edge of resistance. Let's not lose sight of the real issue, Janeway said, her tone calm but firm. This isn't about the legality of someone's origins, and it's not about imposing our laws on your society, but we were asked for help, directly and without coercion. That creates a moral responsibility, not a legal one. She let the silence hang for a moment. You're asking us to look away, to pretend we haven't seen what's been done to him, but we have. Her gaze swept the table. Call it tradition, call it training, call it cultural misalignment. It doesn't change what it was. This is about doing what's right. Rayner steepled his fingers again, a gesture more mechanical now than composed. You place a high value on philosophical framing, Captain, but we are dealing with tangible legacy. The subject in question has been the centrepiece of 3 high courts, viewed by dignitaries and historians from across our territories. Janeway's reply came quiet and measured. From where I stand, Counsellor, you placed a fragile child on display and taught him that stillness was safety. And every time he moved, he paid heavily for it. The words hung in the air, heavier than before. Janeway let the silence settle for a moment longer before speaking. I understand how deeply your society values perception, she said, tone even. Your history, your reputation, these aren't just cultural markers, they're political currency. I respect that. She looked toward Rennis, then to the others. And I also understand that public scrutiny, especially the kind that comes from misunderstanding across cultures, can be dangerous. Reputations can be lost on the strength of a single narrative, or protected by the way a story is told. There was another pause. My proposal is simple. We're prepared to handle this quietly, discreetly, but should the matter ever come to light, you could frame it not as a scandal, but as a moment of clarity, a rare opportunity to demonstrate your values. She paused just long enough to let the thought take root. You'll say the Council identified troubling inconsistencies in the treatment of a cultural holding, and in keeping with your long-standing commitment to diplomacy and ethical conduct, you acted swiftly and decisively. She held their gaze. You released him, not because you were pressured to, but because your conscience demanded it. And more importantly, Counsellor, Janeway continued, her voice firm, you reformed your policies to ensure it never happens again. She looked at him directly now, the weight of her words unmistakably deliberate. In doing so, you became something rare, a society that doesn't just preserve its history, but grows beyond it, that evolves, that leads. Her tone remained calm, controlled, unyielding. And if the matter is ever questioned in future records, you'll have the documentation, internal reviews, policy reforms, a formal transfer of custody, diplomatic, precise. And your reputation, it won't just be protected, it will be reinforced, enhanced even. Then after a slight pause, she added, and he'll be leaving with us. Voyager is already en route away from this region, and eventually will exit the quadrant entirely. No further inquiries, no lingering complications, no risk of contradiction. She let the silence breathe. Everyone wins, counsellors. No shame, no scandal, just the right decision handled with integrity. There was a silence, longer this time. Renas didn't speak right away. His hands remained folded, but the stillness around him had shifted. He wasn't bristling. He was thinking. Finally, he exhaled softly and leaned forward. "Captain," he said, choosing his words with care, "your proposal carries weight. It is measured, tactful, and it allows for resolution." The other delegates stayed quiet, watching him. He continued, "However, our cultural protocols do not permit the unsanctioned release of heritage assets regardless of circumstance, particularly not in response to moral framing. There must be a framework, an exchange." He glanced at his colleagues before returning his gaze to Janeway. "I believe there is space here to construct such a framework. The Council could formally classify the subject as a gift, a gesture of goodwill in a cultural accord with your Federation. But to do so credibly, we would require something of value in return. Not compensation," he added quickly, "but an offering, a diplomatic counterweight. A token of your own legacy, perhaps, or knowledge of mutual benefit." Janeway didn't flinch. She reached for a second pad, already cued and ready. "We anticipated that your traditions might require a formal exchange," she said, sliding the pad across the table. "This contains a curated overview of Voyager's Delta Quadrant survey data, planetary maps, preliminary scientific logs, navigational records, hundreds of light-years of previously uncharted space." She let that hang for a moment. "You'd be the first culture outside the Federation to receive it." Renas accepted the pad slowly, glancing down at the screen as it came to life. Even his practiced expression couldn't fully mask the flicker of interest. Janeway folded her hands again. "As far as the record is concerned, you extended a gift of cultural significance, and we responded in kind, with a gift of exploration." She looked at him steadily. "No scandal, no loss of face, just diplomacy. Exactly as you're known for." Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 19, Resolution. Renas studied the pad in silence. After a moment, he set it down gently on the table and turned to his fellow delegates. "There is precedent for this, if it's framed as a cultural accord, but we must tread carefully. This isn't just releasing a symbol, we're redefining it." The younger one leaned forward slightly. "The optics can be managed. If we present this as a formal exchange, it becomes a strategic act, not a concession. And the Federation has shown restraint. They won't turn this into a public statement." The older councillor frowned, assuming they don't shift their stance later. "They won't," Renas said, quiet but certain. "Captain Janeway has been consistent." They looked to her. She met their eyes and offered a steady nod. "You have my word, councillors. This will be handled with discretion." The younger delegate turned back to the pad. "This data, it's not purely scientific, is it?" Janeway answered calmly. "Primarily, yes. But its greater value lies in how it can be used. The trade potential is significant. Safe routes, resource-rich planets, access to uncharted territory. Even if you don't use it yourselves, others will value it highly." The older councillor shifted in his seat. "You mean we could offer it to others? Build influence?" Janeway didn't smile, but her voice held a hint of agreement. "You'd be the first to have it, and what you do with it is entirely in your hands." Renas sat back slightly, pressing his fingers together. "It's not a loss," he said thoughtfully. "It's a transition, one symbol of legacy exchanged for another, on our terms." Then he looked back at Janeway. "If this is to be formalised, we'll require documentation, signatures, a diplomatic record that satisfies our protocols." Janeway inclined her head, but held her position. "We're prepared to provide that," she said, "on one condition." Rennes raised an eyebrow but said nothing. This can't just be about one individual, Janeway went on. It has to be about what comes next. I want a formal clause, written into the accord, that your council is initiating a full review of your preservation practices, with the intention of preventing this kind of mistreatment from ever happening again. The older delegate frowned. Such reforms are not so easily enacted. Policy change takes time. There are protocols, layers of review. And yet, Janeway said calmly, you intend to release him as a show of ethical clarity, a model of responsibility. She let that hang for a moment. If that's the story, then surely it makes sense for policy change to follow. In fact, I would argue it would be inconsistent, perhaps even damaging to your narrative, if it didn't. There was a pause. Then the younger delegate spoke, almost thoughtfully. If this is to be remembered as a conscientious act, then it must be complete. Not just the gesture, but the outcome. He looked to Rennes. A formal review launched in parallel, written into the record. It would show initiative. Rennes considered him, then Janeway. A symbolic clause, he said, stating the Council's intent to review all cultural preservation protocols in light of this discovery, included as part of the diplomatic accord. It shows foresight, Janeway added, her voice quiet but certain, and credibility. The older delegate hesitated, but finally gave a slow nod. If it's framed that way, then yes, it strengthens the narrative. Rennes folded his hands, composed once more. Then it shall be done. Janeway inclined her head. Then we are agreed. Rennes looked toward the side chamber. Our scribes will prepare the documentation. The exchange can be formalized within the day. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 20, Beneath the Veil. The path leading from the chamber stretched out into the formal grounds beyond. Elegant stonework lined with trimmed hedges, pale flowering trees rising in symmetrical rows. Janeway walked slowly, heading toward the transporter coordinates at the far edge of the gardens. Tuvok moved beside her, silent and contemplative. Footsteps joined them. They both glanced over. It was Rennes. He fell into step beside them, hands loosely clasped behind his back. His voice was low, almost inaudible over the breeze. I wanted to speak with you, away from the chamber, away from the eyes and the performance. Tuvok remained quiet, but he listened. Janeway gave a small nod. What is it, Counselor? They walked a few paces in silence. The air was cool, touched with something floral. I know how this must look, Rennes said quietly, and I won't insult you by asking for understanding. You likely wouldn't get far if you did. That almost earned a smile. No, I didn't think I would. He glanced over, his voice still steady, but lower now, honest. There are things we're taught not to question, not because we believe they're right, but because, on some level, we're expected not to notice. But I noticed. I saw what was happening to him. I saw it clearly. Janeway watched him as he spoke. The formality in his posture was gone now. So was the rehearsed detachment. I didn't speak out. I couldn't, he went on, because doing so would have stripped me of every ounce of influence I've spent decades trying to build. And once I lost that, I'd have had nothing, no voice, no vote, no way to change anything. He would have stayed exactly where he was, and I'd have been gone, unable to help him, or others like him. Janeway glanced sideways. That's the first time you've referred to him as him, she said quietly. Rennes didn't look up right away. Yes, I suppose it is. There was a pause, the kind shaped more by honesty than hesitation. This game we play, the theatre of diplomacy, it's so tightly choreographed. One wrong word can unravel years of negotiation. Me saying him instead of it in the chamber, that alone could have caused my counterparts to derail the talks. Janeway gave a faint nod. And yet here you are, saying it now. Her voice wasn't unkind, just steady, grounded in the truth. Maybe it's a small thing, she added, but small things are often where change begins. Renus gave a quiet breath of agreement, barely audible, but real. I told myself that too, he said. If I could hold my ground long enough, climb high enough, I might reach a place where I could change the system from within, but I was still years away, maybe longer, and I knew he didn't have that kind of time. Janeway's voice softened. It looks like change will happen now, and you were part of that. You got your wish. Renus gave a quiet nod. Eventually, yes. The wheels of change will now turn, but slowly. Our process of governance doesn't move quickly, even when it wants to. If he'd stayed, he still wouldn't have been safe. Not for a long time. Maybe not even in his lifespan. He hesitated, then added, more quietly, So, no, not in time for him, and not because of me. She stopped walking and turned toward him. Do you even know his name, Counselor? Renus hesitated, then nodded. Actually, I do. I doubt the others ever bothered to ask, though. But I know. It's Kai. He drew a breath. I couldn't say it in there, but I've known for a long time. And I've hoped, quietly, desperately, that someone from beyond our world would come. That someone might see what I couldn't speak aloud. His hands came apart, unclasped, open. I hated what was happening to him. I truly did. But I was powerless to stop it. Not because I lacked conviction, but because our bureaucratic processes would have silenced me, and in doing so, sealed him away forever. Janeway held his gaze for a long moment. He's safe now, she said. I'm glad, Renus replied. And this time there was no polish to his words, no distance, only truth. They stood in silence for a beat. The soft rustle of branches filled the quiet where ceremony used to be. Then, just as she turned to leave, Renus spoke again. Please, treat him well, kindly, with dignity, and, if you're able, with love. I am ashamed to say, he never had that from us. Janeway's expression shifted, just slightly, but clearly. He has it now, she said. All of it. And he always will. Renus lowered his head, clearly relieved. I can't thank you enough, Captain. Truly. I may finally sleep tonight, knowing he's free. She gave a single respectful nod, and turned to continue her walk toward the beam-out point, leaving Renus standing alone among the hedges and the fading light. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State, Chapter 21, A Wish Granted. The transporter hum had barely faded when Janeway stepped off the pad. The ship felt quieter than usual, as if it already understood the weight of what had just taken place. She didn't pause. She set off toward sickbay, not calling anyone, not announcing her return, just moving forward, purposefully. Tuvok walked beside her, silent as ever. But when they reached the corridor outside sickbay, he slowed. Their eyes met briefly, no words exchanged. This part wasn't his. He gave a nod, turned and continued down the corridor, heading back toward the bridge. Inside, the lighting had been dimmed slightly. Calm, steady. The doctor looked up from his console and nodded. He's awake, responsive, still very cautious, but coherent. Has he asked anything? She asked. He asked if you were coming back. Janeway nodded once. She moved to the bedside slowly, carefully, like she might startle him, but Kai was already watching her, eyes wide and still wary, though not afraid. Not any more. She stopped at his side. No guards, no handlers, no protocols, just her. Kai, you asked me a question yesterday, she said softly. You asked if you could stay. He blinked, barely breathing. Janeway's voice didn't waver. The answer is yes. He just looked at her, as if trying to believe it. Not just for now, not just until the dust settles. You're free, Kai. No more ownership, no more control. You're your own person, and if you want to be here, on Voyager, nothing would make us happier than to help you make this your home. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything he couldn't yet put into words. His fingers clutched faintly at the blanket. His chest trembled with an unspoken breath, and when his voice finally came, it was barely a whisper. I can really stay. If Voyager is where you want to be, then Voyager will be your home, for as long as you want it to be, Janeway said softly, nodding. Kai stared at her, eyes wide and unblinking. Then slowly, something shifted. His face crumpled, just slightly at first. A tremble in his mouth, a tightening of his jaw as the words reached somewhere deep inside him that had never been touched with safety before. And then it broke. Tears welled suddenly, spilling over without resistance. Not quiet, not graceful. This wasn't the delicate weeping of a storybook boy. This was raw, shaking, unstoppable sobbing, the kind that came from years of silence, years of being told not to feel. He covered his face with both hands, as if afraid to be seen, but didn't turn away. He couldn't. His whole body trembled, and still he cried, loud and messy and real. Janeway didn't try to stop him. She stayed by his side, steady and silent, letting him feel it all. Just being there. Being someone who cared. And for the first time in his life, Kai didn't have to hide the sound of his grief. Because for the first time, he was free. Star Trek Voyager, Ward of the State. Epilogue and Ending. Captain's Log, Supplemental. We've resumed course for home, with the newest member of our Voyager family aboard. The Velarrian situation has been resolved diplomatically through the signing of a formal treaty and cultural accord with the Federation. Kai, our newest addition, is adjusting slowly to his new life here on Voyager. He is fragile, timid. His recovery will be a long road, but the crew has taken to him with a tenderness and quiet love I didn't expect, though perhaps I should have. There's something about him that draws it out, a protective instinct, a compelling need to show him the kind of care he's never known. They see what I saw, something precious, not because of what he was created to be or how he was once displayed, but because of who he is now. Quiet, gentle, alive in a way he was never allowed to be before, a presence, with thoughts, feelings, growing curiosity, and a voice of his own. He's begun to speak more freely. He still startles at loud noises, still recoils from sudden movement, but he no longer flinches when someone reaches out with kindness. That, more than anything, tells me he's starting to believe he's safe. He's begun asking questions now, softly, cautiously but with growing confidence, about the ship, the stars, the people around him. He's starting to understand that he's allowed to be curious, and that no one expects him to stay silent. He prefers quiet corners, soft lighting, the company of those who ask nothing of him but gladly answer anything he wants to know. Neelix has made it his mission to discover Kai's favourite foods. The doctor is monitoring his recovery, physically, emotionally, and in ways there's no scan for. Tom and B'Elanna have drawn him into their orbit with a kind of natural, unspoken warmth, and Harry has all but practically adopted him. I catch myself smiling sometimes when I see them together. There's something about the way Kai looks at Harry, like he's trying to understand how that kind of steadfast affection could possibly be real. And yet, he's starting to trust that it is. They've become a kind of family, not formal, not official, but real in all the ways that matter, and it's doing him good. He's starting to grow in the quiet, to reach, to believe. Right now, Kai is simply learning what it means to live without fear. And for the first time in his life, he's beginning to believe that he's allowed to. I don't know what his future holds. I only know that today he is safe, he is free, and he is home. End log. Final scene. The ship was quiet in the late hour, most of the crew finishing their rotations. Lights dimmed in the outer corridors. Beyond the windows, the stars drifted past in a silent, steady stream. Kai wasn't dressed in flowing silks anymore, just soft, crew-issue fatigues. The sleeves hung a little too long, the collar sat a little loose around his neck. His tail flicked lazily behind him, and his soft, feline ears perked forward as he watched the stars slide by. His eyes were wide, not afraid, just open, curious. He didn't flinch when he heard footsteps behind him. A gentle voice called from the doorway. "Kai, Neelix says the cake won't last forever, and it's your favourite." He turned. For a heartbeat, he simply looked at them, framed in the soft corridor light. Then something shifted in his face, not shy, not uncertain. A real smile. Unrestrained. Honest. The kind of smile that only comes when someone has finally been told, without words, that they belong. He sat with them that night, just a quiet gathering, a slice of cake, a few gentle voices, and for the first time in his life, he believed it.